Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. Today we examine a photograph that should not exist, a simple group portrait that challenges our understanding of history and perhaps reality itself. The photograph appears unremarkable at first glance. Dating from 1913, it shows a gathering of Titanic survivors, 1 year after the infamous maritime disaster. Sepia-toned and slightly faded, the image captures about 20 people arranged in 3 rows on the deck of a ship, likely during a memorial journey. Their faces show the complex emotions you might expect, relief at their own survival mixed with the solemn remembrance of those lost. Men in period suits and women in long dresses stand somewhat awkwardly, as was common in photographs of that era. The Atlantic Ocean stretches behind them, vast and eerily calm. Nothing like the frigid waters that claimed over 1,500 lives on that April night in 1912. A careful examination of their expressions reveals something telling. These are people who have witnessed death on an unimaginable scale, yet survived to tell the tale. But there is something wrong with this image. In the back row, slightly offset from center, stands a figure who simply cannot be there. Historical records identified this person as Elizabeth Harmon, a 32-year-old American returning from London. What makes her presence impossible is well-documented fact. Elizabeth Harmon was confirmed among the dead when the Titanic sank. Her body was never recovered from the North Atlantic, like so many others lost to the depths that night. Yet here she stands, clearly visible and identifiable by the distinctive pearl necklace and brooch that her family had described in painful detail when filing their insurance claim after the disaster. Her facial features match existing photographs from before the voyage. There is no question of her identity. The impossible woman in the photograph is unquestionably Elizabeth Harmon. More disturbing still is her expression. While the other survivors display the expected mixture of solemn remembrance and relief, Elizabeth's face shows something altogether different. Her eyes seem to look slightly past the camera, focused on something or someone beyond the photographer. Her lips form neither smile nor frown, but rest in an unsettling neutral state that stands out among the more emotionally present expressions surrounding her. The photograph came to light when the great-grandson of the ship's photographer discovered it in a collection of family memorabilia. Experts have examined the photograph extensively, confirming its authenticity. It has not been tampered with or altered. The photographic paper, chemical composition, and developing techniques all date accurately to 1913. How could a woman documented to have perished on the Titanic appear in a photograph of survivors taken a year after her death? Who, or what, is looking back at us from this impossible image? And perhaps most chillingly, if Elizabeth Harmon didn't die on the Titanic, what happened to her during that year between disaster and documentation? Join us as we unravel the mystery of the impossible passenger and the photograph that should not exist. After careful analysis, we turn to the official passenger manifests of the Titanic. Elizabeth Harmon was indeed listed among the third-class passengers who boarded in Southampton on April 10, 1912. Her ticket, number A52171, was purchased just 3 days before departure. According to survivor accounts, she was last seen on the starboard side of the boat deck, having refused a seat on lifeboat number 6, reportedly stating she would wait for the next one. No such opportunity ever came. The memorial gathering in the photograph took place aboard the Oceanic, which followed the Titanic's intended route as closely as maritime regulations would permit. The survivors had assembled to cast wreaths into the approximate area of the sinking. The ship's log confirms calm seas that day, like glass, wrote Captain Herbert James Haddock, as if in respectful stillness. I tracked down Margaret Brown, later known as the unsinkable Molly Brown, who appears in the front row of the photograph. Before her death in 1932, she gave numerous interviews about the disaster and the subsequent memorial journey. In none of them did she mention Elizabeth Harmon's presence. More tellingly, in a 1927 radio interview preserved in the Library of Congress, Brown specifically named every person in the photograph when presented with a copy. She identified everyone except the figure we now recognize as Elizabeth Harmon, despite looking directly at her position in the image. It was as if Brown could not see her. The Harmon family history provides additional disturbing elements. Elizabeth's sister Charlotte maintained until her death that she received a telegram from Elizabeth 1 week after the sinking. The telegram, never produced but described in Charlotte's diary, contained just 5 words: "Water couldn't take me. Waiting." The family dismissed this as the delusion of a grieving sister. More puzzling still are the insurance records. White Star Line, the Titanic's owner, paid out death benefits to the families of lost passengers. The company's ledger shows payment to all Harmon family members except Elizabeth. A notation in the margin simply states, "Claim withdrawn by request." Photographic analysis experts from the Smithsonian employed modern AI imaging technology to examine Elizabeth's figure in the photograph. The results were unsettling. While the other subjects display the slight blur common to period photography due to minute movements during exposure, Elizabeth appears in perfect focus, impossibly still, as if she alone remained completely motionless during the entire 8-second exposure. Most disturbing is what we discovered in the ship photographer's journal, found alongside the original glass plate negative. His entry from that day reads, "Most unusual occurrence during the memorial service. When arranging the group, I counted 23 persons. Upon developing the plate, 24 appear in the image. I cannot account for this discrepancy, though I feel a peculiar chill when studying the final figure in the back row. Her gaze seems to follow me about the dark room." The photographer, Thomas Whitley, abandoned his profession shortly afterward. His family reported he developed an intense fear of water and refused to ever set foot on a ship again. The mystery deepened when I discovered a series of letters between the Oceanic's captain and White Star Line headquarters, sealed in company archives until 1978. Captain Haddock described peculiar instrument malfunctions that occurred only during the memorial service. Compasses reportedly spun without explanation, and the ship's chronometers temporarily displayed impossible times. Most intriguing was his report that the water temperature where they cast wreaths measured nearly 4 degrees warmer than surrounding areas, despite being the exact coordinates where hundreds had succumbed to hypothermia. I located the original passenger registry from the memorial voyage. The document shows precisely 23 signatures, with no entry for Elizabeth Harmon. Yet the ship's purser noted in his log that 24 breakfast trays were prepared each morning of the journey, though he could only account for 23 passengers. One tray was consistently found untouched in cabin 13, which, according to booking records, remained unoccupied for the entire voyage. The Harmon family's history reveals further anomalies. Elizabeth's personal effects, which should never have been recovered, mysteriously arrived at her sister Charlotte's home 3 months after the sinking. A small valise containing a water-damaged journal, her pearl necklace, and a brooch, the same one visible in our photograph. Charlotte's diary entry from that day reads, "They came by post, no return address. The package was dry but smelled of the sea." Elizabeth's journal pages contain only water stains, except the final page where just 2 words appear: "Still waiting." Professor Marion Thorne of Johns Hopkins University, an expert in post-traumatic phenomena, offered a psychological theory when shown the photograph. "Collective trauma can manifest in shared delusions," she explained. Perhaps these survivors needed to believe someone had transcended death itself. Elizabeth became their symbolic vessel. When I pointed out that the survivors never actually mentioned Elizabeth's presence, Thorne fell silent, her scientific explanation faltering. I tracked the photograph's chain of custody through 7 different owners before it reached the great-grandson of the photographer. 5 of the 7 reported the same unsettling phenomenon: water damage appearing on the photograph's surface only during maritime disasters elsewhere in the world. During the Lusitania sinking, the Andrea Doria collision, and even the more recent Estonia ferry disaster, owners reported that the photograph became temporarily damp, specifically around the image of Elizabeth Harmon. The current whereabouts of the original glass negative remain unknown. The photographer's great-grandson claims it was stolen from his collection in 1997, coinciding with the production of James Cameron's Titanic film. More concerning is his statement that in the weeks before the theft, the negative began showing signs of alteration. Elizabeth's figure appeared to have moved slightly closer to the camera with each passing day. Maritime records show an unusual pattern of rescue ships passing through the exact Titanic sinking coordinates over decades following the disaster. Several reported brief radio interference and unexplained sonar contacts. In 1956, the cargo vessel Bremen diverted course after the captain reported seeing a woman in period dress standing on the water's surface at those coordinates. By the time they reached the position, nothing remained but unusually calm waters in an otherwise choppy sea. In 2004, I acquired a curious artifact at an estate auction in Halifax, a tarnished pocket watch reportedly recovered from the Titanic wreckage during an undocumented dive in the 1980s. The watch's hands remained frozen at 2:20, the approximate time the ship completely disappeared beneath the waves. The connection seemed tenuous until I noticed the inscription inside. To EH, time is but another ocean to cross. The initials matched our impossible passenger. The watch's provenance trail led to a Nova Scotian fisherman who claimed to have pulled it from the sea in his nets. Not near the wreckage site, but at a location hundreds of miles away where he had experienced an inexplicable equipment failure. His boat had been stranded for 3 days despite clear weather until the watch appeared in his net. He reported hearing a woman's voice calling from the water throughout those nights. When I brought the watch within proximity of the photograph, witnesses reported seeing condensation form on the glass covering Elizabeth's face. More disturbing, 3 separate visitors to my research office claimed they saw her figure blink. Upon frame-by-frame analysis of high-resolution scans taken over a 6-hour period, we discovered something inexplicable, microscopic changes in her facial features, as if the photograph itself were somehow alive. Dr. Eleanor Voss, a quantum physicist at MIT, proposed a controversial theory after examining both artifacts. Some theoretical models suggest consciousness itself may quantum entangle with spacetime under extreme trauma, she explained. The temperature differential reported at the wreck site might indicate a localized breakdown in temporal physics. Perhaps Elizabeth Harmon didn't die that night. She became unstuck in time. This theory gained unexpected support when marine archaeologist Thomas Keller revealed a detail from the 2010 Titanic debris field mapping project. Submersible sensors detected an anomalous energy signature moving through the wreckage, one that appeared on instruments as human-shaped and approximately Elizabeth's height. The signature disappeared when approached, only to reappear elsewhere in the debris field minutes later. Most compelling is the testimony of Abigail Fletcher, the last living relative of Elizabeth Harmon, whom I interviewed in her nursing home last year shortly before her death. She described childhood memories of a visiting lady who would appear in her bedroom on the anniversary of the sinking. She was looking for something, Fletcher recalled. She would open her mouth to speak, but only water would come out. Behind her, I could see others waiting, so many others. She seemed to be their representative. Fletcher's final statement haunts me still. The last time she came, when I was 17, she finally spoke. She said, "Time moves differently in the deep. We're still falling, all of us." The ship never stopped sinking. Then she showed me her watch. The hands weren't frozen anymore. They were moving backward. The implications are staggering. Was Elizabeth Harmon somehow caught between moments, neither dead nor alive? Does she represent something more profound? An emissary for all those lost souls trapped in some liminal state between life and death, time and timelessness? The most unsettling development occurred last month when marine biologist Sophia Chen deployed remote sensors at the Titanic site for an unrelated climate study. Her equipment captured something the previous expeditions had missed, a persistent acoustic anomaly emanating from the ship's remains. When isolated and enhanced, the sound revealed itself as a woman's voice repeating coordinates in an endless loop, not for the Titanic's resting place, but for a location nearly 80 miles southwest. I chartered a research vessel to investigate these coordinates, bringing both the photograph and pocket watch. As we approached the location on a calm April morning, our navigation systems failed simultaneously. The captain maintained our position using traditional celestial navigation, and we deployed sonar to scan the seafloor. What we discovered challenges rational explanation, a perfect circle of disturbed sediment, approximately the size of a lifeboat, with unusual temperature variations surrounding it. Our remotely operated vehicle's cameras revealed something more inexplicable, Personal effects arranged in a deliberate pattern across the seafloor. A woman's shoe, a hairbrush, a damaged locket, all preserved in the frigid depths far beyond natural explanation, all dating to the Titanic era. At the center lay a small, intact hand mirror facing upward, somehow free of expected marine growth and corrosion. When the ROV's lights illuminated the mirror, our video feed captured a reflection that wasn't our submersible, but a woman's face, unmistakably Elizabeth Harmon's, staring back from the glass. The feed cut out immediately afterward. When restored 43 minutes later, the mirror had vanished, though other artifacts remained in place. That night, every crew member reported the same dream, standing on the Titanic's deck as it slipped beneath the waves, watching survivors in lifeboats drift away. In each dream, Elizabeth Harmon stood at the railing, but rather than panic, she seemed to be waiting, watching the water rise with curious expectation. As the freezing Atlantic reached her waist, she turned to face each dreamer and spoke. Time doesn't flow like water. Water flows like time. The photograph has changed again. Elizabeth no longer stands in the back row. Her figure now appears faintly in multiple positions throughout the image, behind each survivor, like a shadow or echo. Meanwhile, the watch has begun functioning again after over a century, though it runs counterclockwise, completing 24 hours in reverse precisely every day. Most compelling is what we discovered in recently declassified naval records. During the height of the Cold War, submarine USS Scorpion reported tracking an acoustic signature matching human vocal patterns at crush depth near the Titanic site in 1968. The submarine disappeared shortly afterward. The recording, preserved in naval archives, contains a woman's voice clearly stating, "The water preserves us. We exist in the moment of sinking, eternally suspended between life and death. I am their witness." What if the Titanic disaster tore something in the fabric of reality? What if Elizabeth Harmon and perhaps others exist in some quantum state between moments, a purgatory of endlessly repeating time? If the photograph and watch are indeed connected to this temporal anomaly, the implications extend far beyond one maritime disaster. After examining the photograph for hundreds of hours, I noticed something overlooked by previous researchers. In the background, barely visible against the horizon line, appears the silhouette of another vessel. Maritime records confirm no other ships were present during the oceanic memorial journey. Using advanced image enhancement techniques, we identified the shadowy vessel as matching the profile of the Californian, the ship infamously positioned just 10 miles from the Titanic during its sinking, whose captain had inexplicably stopped for the night and whose radio operator had gone off duty, missing the distress signals. This connection led me to Stanley Lord, the Californian's captain who went to his grave defending his inaction that night. His personal journals, recently donated to the Liverpool Maritime Museum by his granddaughter, contain a disturbing entry dated exactly 1 year after the disaster, coinciding with the memorial voyage. She visits again tonight, standing at the foot of my bed, dripping seawater onto the floor. Her eyes hold no accusation, which is somehow worse. "We are preserved in your inaction," she whispers, "existing forever in the moment you chose to do nothing." The museum curator revealed that Lord's journals show increasing psychological deterioration in the years following the disaster. He repeatedly described encountering passengers from the Titanic in impossible places, sitting in his parlor, following him through London streets, watching from shorelines as he passed on later voyages. Elizabeth Harmon featured prominently in these accounts, always described as their representative. "I've established contact with Dr. Hiroko Yamamoto at the Kyoto Institute for Quantum Studies, who proposes that extreme trauma involving large numbers of people may create what she terms consensus reality fractures. She suggests the collective fear and awareness of 1,500 people facing death simultaneously could generate enough psychic energy to create localized tears in space-time. Water is the ideal medium for preserving such anomalies," Dr. Yamamoto explained. "Its molecular memory and ability to exist in multiple states simultaneously makes it the perfect conductor for consciousness fragmented by trauma." Perhaps most chilling is what happened during my interview with retired submersible pilot Terrence McGill, who participated in the first manned exploration of the Titanic wreckage in 1986. McGill revealed that official expedition logs had been sanitized before public release. The original records described a phenomenon the crew nicknamed the passengers, unexplained thermal signatures moving throughout the wreckage that appeared human in shape when viewed through certain instruments. "We all saw her most clearly," McGill confessed, his hands trembling around his coffee cup. "A woman in period dress, standing on the bow as if it were still above water. When our exterior lights hit her, she turned to look at us, and we all heard her voice through the hull. Which is physically impossible at that depth," she said. "Time passes differently for the unrescued. We're still sending distress signals." 2 days after our interview, McGill was found in his bathtub, drowned despite no signs of struggle or medical episode. First responders reported the bathroom floor was covered in salt water, which tested positive for the same microorganisms found in the North Atlantic near the Titanic site. The photograph has begun to exhibit new properties when subjected to different environmental conditions. During a controlled laboratory test at Stanford University, researchers exposed it to varying temperatures, noting that below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, a thin layer of frost forms exclusively around Elizabeth's multiplied figures, even when the rest of the photograph remains completely dry. More disturbing, under ultraviolet light, previously invisible markings appeared across the image, coordinates matching the locations of other major maritime disasters throughout the 20th century. "I've established an unsettling correlation between Elizabeth Harmon's appearances and subsequent disasters at sea. In 1934, a lighthouse keeper off the coast of New Jersey reported seeing a woman in Edwardian dress standing on the water one day before the SS Morro Castle caught fire, claiming 137 lives. Similar sightings preceded the HMS Thetis submarine disaster and the capsizing of the MS Estonia. In each case, witnesses described a woman watching from the water's surface, her expression neither malevolent nor benevolent, merely observant. The pocket watch has developed another inexplicable property. When placed near navigational equipment, it causes temporary but significant errors. During our research voyage, the captain discovered his sextant readings placed us over 500 miles from our actual position when he took measurements with the watch nearby. The error disappeared when the artifact was sealed in a lead-lined container. Even digital GPS systems showed impossible coordinates when exposed to the watch for more than 7 minutes. Dr. Eliza Werner, a specialist in post-mortem photography from Vienna University, has identified what we all missed in our fixation on Elizabeth Harmon. The other survivors in the photograph show subtle characteristics inconsistent with living subjects. Their eyes lack specular highlights, and their skin tones differ slightly from period-appropriate photographic standards. "It's as if," Werner concluded, "Elizabeth is the only truly living person in an image of the dead. The implications are staggering. What if our understanding is entirely backward? What if Elizabeth Harmon is not an impossibility among the living, but rather the only living person among those who only appear to have survived? I've located the ship's manifest for the Carpathia, which rescued Titanic's survivors. Hidden in the margin notes is a curious annotation beside passenger counts. Soul tally incomplete. The rescued carry absences with them. The handwriting matches the Carpathia's chaplain, who suffered a nervous breakdown 3 months after the rescue operation and spent his remaining years in an asylum, reportedly drawing endless images of people half submerged in water. Last week I received an unmarked package containing a fragment of wood identified as coming from one of Titanic's lifeboats. Carbon dating confirms its age. More incredibly, when placed beside our photograph, the wood seeps salt water only during the exact minute of each day corresponding to when the Titanic made its final plunge, 2:20 a.m. A microscopic examination of this water revealed plankton species extinct since 1936. Most disturbing is what happened during an attempt to create a 3-dimensional model of Elizabeth's face using AI-enhanced photogrammetry. The algorithm repeatedly failed at the same processing point, generating an error message no programmer could explain. Subject exists simultaneously in multiple temporal coordinates. Dimensional reconciliation impossible. When our lead technician examined the raw data, she discovered the program had identified not one but 17 slightly different versions of Elizabeth's face in the single image, each seemingly from a different moment in time. The night the package containing the lifeboat fragment arrived, I experienced something I've been reluctant to document until now. I awoke at precisely 2:20 a.m. to find my bedroom filled with the scent of seawater. The photograph, which I had placed on my desk across the room, was emitting a faint blue luminescence. When I approached, I distinctly heard a woman's voice emanating from the image itself, though no recording equipment captured this audio. "We exist in the space between rescue and abandonment," the voice whispered. "Not just those from Titanic, all the forgotten, all the lost at sea. Time moves differently for souls suspended in water. I've consulted with Dr. Amelia Vasquez, a theoretical physicist specializing in quantum memory states. Her hypothesis is both elegant and terrifying. Water has long been theorized to retain molecular memory," she explained. "The ocean that swallowed Titanic still remembers the event. But what if human consciousness, 1,500 minds experiencing simultaneous trauma, imprinted itself on that water? And what if Elizabeth Harmon somehow became the focal point for this collective consciousness? This would explain why Elizabeth appears as multiple overlapping figures in the photograph. She isn't just herself, but a vessel containing multitudes. She's not merely a ghost or temporal anomaly, but a quantum repository of all those lost souls. I've discovered records of 17 separate recovery operations for Titanic victims in the weeks following the disaster. The final body recovered, numbered 337, though only 328 are officially documented, was listed only as female, approximately 30 years of age, pearl necklace, identity uncertain. This body was claimed by an unknown person and removed before proper documentation. The recovery ship's log notes something peculiar. Subject showed no expected decomposition despite 15 days in water. Skin remained warm to touch. Doctor refused to declare deceased despite absence of pulse. The implications are staggering. What if Elizabeth Harmon's body was recovered but she wasn't truly dead? What if she existed in some liminal state between life and death? Yesterday, I received a communication from an oceanographic research vessel currently positioned above the Titanic wreckage. Their submersible's cameras captured something unprecedented. The water inside the ship's remains appears to be moving against the prevailing currents, flowing in what the scientists described as deliberate patterns resembling human movement. More disturbing still, these movements correspond precisely to where passengers would have been as the ship made its final descent. The vessel's captain reports that their communications officer has been receiving fragmented radio signals that, when cleaned of static, contain what sounds like a woman's voice repeatedly counting 1,503, 1,504. The count increases by 1 each day, matching exactly the number of days since the disaster occurred. As I write this, the photograph has changed again. Elizabeth Harmon now appears clearly in the foreground of the image, her back to the camera, facing the other survivors. Their expressions have transformed from solemn remembrance to something resembling recognition. As if they've finally acknowledged her presence after all these years, the watch has begun communicating in its own language. Last night, while examining it under specialized lighting, I discovered microscopic engravings appearing along its inner mechanisms, engravings that weren't present during previous examinations. They form nautical coordinates mapping a perfect circle around the Titanic wreckage site, with additional points marking every major maritime disaster of the past century. More disturbing is what happened when I placed a drop of water from the weeping lifeboat fragment onto the watch face. The liquid didn't behave according to normal physical properties. Instead of spreading or evaporating, it formed itself into tiny, perfect letters spelling out, "We are the suspended," before being absorbed into the metal itself. I've been contacted by Josephine Mercer, aged 104, who claims her mother was aboard the Oceanic during the memorial journey but refused to join the photograph. Mother said there was a woman no one else could see who kept taking different positions among the group. Mercer explained in our phone conversation. She described how this woman seemed to flicker between locations, like a faulty motion picture. When the photographer called everyone together, Mother said she felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the photograph would somehow capture more than just their images. Mercer sent me her mother's journal, which contains an entry from that day describing how the water around the ship behaved strangely during the memorial service. The ocean parted briefly as wreaths were cast. I alone seemed to notice how the water formed a perfect circle around them, revealing glimpses of figures standing on the seafloor below, looking upward. Elizabeth was among them, then suddenly aboard our ship. then back below, as if she existed in both places simultaneously. The journal's final pages contain increasingly frantic entries about being followed by reflections without sources and voices that speak from empty rooms. The handwriting deteriorates until the final entry, which simply states, "She has explained it to me now." The sea is a moment preserved. They are not dead in the traditional sense. They exist in the eternal moment of dying, and Elizabeth walks between their world and ours. I've submitted water samples from both the lifeboat fragment and the photograph to Dr. Naomi Chen at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Her preliminary analysis revealed something impossible. The water contains oxygen isotopes that date it to the pre-industrial era, yet it also shows trace elements of compounds not synthesized until the 1970s. It's as if, Chen wrote, this water exists simultaneously across different time periods. Most concerning is what happened during my latest examination of the photograph under hyperspectral imaging. The technology revealed layers of the image invisible to conventional analysis. Beneath the visible photograph lies another image, the Titanic itself on the ocean floor, surrounded by human figures in period clothing, standing upright as if the crushing depth and century of immersion had no effect on them. At their center stands Elizabeth Harmon, her arms outstretched toward the surface. The camera operator who processed these images resigned immediately afterward. His resignation letter mentioned recurring dreams of a woman who counts the days of our drowning and the sensation of water filling my lungs every night at 20 minutes past 2. The expedition ship Hawthorne reported something unprecedented yesterday, while positioned directly above the Titanic wreckage site. During routine sonar mapping, instruments detected what technicians described as an acoustic impossibility. Hundreds of distinct sound patterns matching the acoustic signatures of human voices in conversation, emanating from within the sealed hull sections where no air pockets could possibly exist. When these recordings were analyzed at our laboratory, voice recognition software identified 17 distinct conversation patterns repeating on precise 60-second loops. More disturbing, one voice, clearly female, wasn't part of these loops but moved between them, as if conducting separate conversations simultaneously. Her voice appeared consistently stronger whenever our equipment was positioned near the grand staircase area. I've obtained the personal effects of Thomas Andrews, Titanic's designer who went down with the ship. His great-granddaughter provided access to a previously undisclosed sketchbook containing designs never implemented in the final vessel. Most notable was a peculiar modification to the grand staircase, a hidden compartment beneath the steps containing what Andrews labeled temporal stabilizers. His accompanying notes reference chronological anchoring and preserving moments within architectural space. Andrews had apparently been deeply interested in fringe scientific theories about time's nonlinear properties. Correspondence between him and Nikola Tesla discussed experiments attempting to crystallize moments within physical structures. The most troubling document was a letter Tesla sent Andrews just days before Titanic sailed. "I fear your implementation may succeed too well. Should catastrophe befall your creation, the emotional energy released might accomplish what our laboratory experiments could not, a perpetual preservation of consciousness within suspended time." Maritime historians have long puzzled over why Andrews seemed so fatalistic once the collision occurred, calmly calculating the ship's remaining time rather than assisting with evacuations. These documents suggest a horrifying possibility. He understood exactly what his modifications might do under these precise circumstances. I've traced Elizabeth Harmon's background more thoroughly, discovering she wasn't merely a passenger, but had connections to Andrews through her late husband, who had invested in experimental physics research. More tellingly, her booking on Titanic was made last minute after Andrews specifically requested her presence in a telegram reading only. The confluence approaches. Your participation is essential. Water samples taken by deep-sea probes from inside the wreck continue defying conventional physics. When subjected to electrical current, they form patterns matching brainwave activity. More alarmingly, these patterns synchronize perfectly with the watch's counterclockwise movement, completing full cycles at precisely 2:20 each morning. The Historical Society in Elizabeth's hometown revealed something previously unreported. Throughout her life, Elizabeth suffered from a rare condition where she would occasionally speak words hours or days before hearing them. Family journals described how she would answer questions not yet asked and respond to letters not yet received. Doctors diagnosed temporal aphasia, but her husband's private note suggested something far more profound. E continues experiencing moments out of sequence. She exists partially unmoored from time's conventional flow. Perhaps Elizabeth wasn't trapped by the disaster. She was intentionally there, someone whose natural temporal displacement made her the perfect conductor for what Andrews had theorized. Consciousness preserved within water's molecular memory, suspended forever in the moment between life and death. The impact of our research has extended beyond academic curiosity into increasingly personal territory. Last night, I awoke to find my bedroom floor covered in a thin layer of water despite no apparent source. When I attempted to document this with my phone's camera, the screen displayed only static, except for a single frame that, when isolated, clearly showed Elizabeth Harmon standing in the corner of my bedroom. The water evaporated by morning, leaving behind a residue that, when analyzed, contained microscopic fragments of coal consistent with Titanic's boiler rooms. I've received correspondence from 7 different individuals across 3 continents who claim to have experienced identical dreams after viewing digital copies of the photograph online. Each describes standing on a ship's deck as water rises around them, while a woman in Edwardian dress walks across the water's surface, touching the foreheads of drowning passengers, who then become still, their expressions peaceful despite their circumstances. The dreamers report waking with the taste of salt water in their mouths and the distinct sensation of pressure in their ears, as if having been at significant depth. The watch has developed another disturbing property. When placed near recording equipment, it somehow imprints voices onto the media. During a controlled experiment at the University Sound Laboratory, we captured what audio engineers identified as multiple conversations occurring simultaneously, all in period-appropriate English with accents matching Titanic's passenger demographics. Most chilling was a child's voice clearly asking, "Is it time to wake up yet, Mother? We've been sleeping in the water so long." Dr. Vasquez's quantum research team has proposed a theoretical framework they call consciousness crystallization to explain these phenomena. Their mathematical models suggest that under precise conditions involving extreme emotional trauma, large-scale loss of life, and specific properties of the surrounding medium, in this case, near-freezing salt water, human consciousness might not dissipate at death but instead become suspended in a state of quantum entanglement with its environment. What's happening isn't haunting in the traditional sense, Dr. Vasquez explained. These aren't ghosts as we conventionally understand them. They're more like emotional cognitive imprints preserved in a moment that hasn't fully resolved itself in space-time. Elizabeth Harmon, with her pre-existing temporal displacement condition, became the natural bridge between these suspended states and our linear experience of reality. The photograph now appears to be affecting physical systems around it. Electronic devices malfunction in patterns that, when mapped, recreate the layout of Titanic's passenger decks. More concerning, metal objects within 20 feet of the image show accelerated corrosion consistent with prolonged saltwater exposure, while wooden items develop stress patterns matching those caused by immense hydrostatic pressure. I've consulted with Dr. Richard Shepard, an expert in quantum information theory, who suggests something unprecedented. What if the 1,500 people who died that night aren't actually dead in the conventional sense? What if their consciousness, unable to process the traumatic discontinuity of such a death, created a sustained quantum state that exists perpendicular to normal temporal flow? Elizabeth Harmon isn't haunting us. She's trying to reconcile 2 incompatible states of reality. The photograph and watch now reside in a custom-built containment chamber at the university's quantum research facility, yet their influence continues to expand. Last week, 3 separate maritime research vessels reported their navigation systems spontaneously recalibrating to the Titanic coordinates regardless of their actual position. Each incident occurred precisely at 2:20 in the morning, local time. I've established contact with Helena Goodwin, a deep-sea geologist who participated in the 2005 expedition to the wreckage site. She revealed something absent from official reports: temperature anomalies forming human-shaped cold spots throughout the debris field. More significantly, Samples taken from these locations contained traces of a previously unknown compound that appears to slow molecular movement without conventional freezing. Whatever's happening there defies standard physics, Goodwin explained. We recorded time dilation effects within these cold spots. Our equipment showed temporal discrepancies of up to 17 minutes within spaces barely large enough to contain a human body. The most compelling evidence comes from Captain Edward Nichols, who commanded a salvage operation in 1998. His ship's log, which he provided after learning of our research, describes how their underwater microphones captured what sounded like a chamber orchestra playing the hymn, "Nearer My God to Thee." The piece reportedly played as Titanic sank. The recording contained no ambient ocean noise whatsoever, as if captured in a perfect vacuum, or perhaps in a moment isolated from normal space-time. The music wasn't an echo or a ghost sound, Nichols insisted. It was happening right then, in real time. My sound engineer said it was like the musicians were still playing, caught in an endless loop. My analysis of Elizabeth Harmon's known movements before boarding Titanic revealed she had visited Nikola Tesla's laboratory just 3 days prior to sailing. Tesla's partially destroyed notebooks mention a Mrs. H, who demonstrated remarkable temporal slippage during consciousness experiments. One passage reads, "Subject exists simultaneously across multiple moments. When subjected to electromagnetic fields, she reports experiencing past and future as concurrent with present. Andrews believes her condition perfect for his maritime experiment." What emerges is a terrible possibility. Elizabeth Harmon wasn't a victim of circumstance, but a deliberate participant in Andrews's attempt to create what he called a moment preserve, a space where time could be locally suspended. The Titanic disaster wasn't the experiment's failure, but its catastrophic success. The watch has begun influencing larger water bodies. Laboratory samples placed near it develop microscopic vortices visible only under electron microscopy, perfect spirals matching the pattern of Titanic's descent path. More alarming, when observed continuously, these spirals appear to contain miniature human figures in period clothing, seemingly aware of being observed. Yesterday, a package arrived containing a small, barnacle-encrusted hand mirror recovered by a trawler near the Newfoundland Grand Banks. A note accompanied it. Found in our nets. When we looked into it, we saw a crowded ship's corridor instead of our reflections. A woman kept walking past the drowning people, touching their shoulders. They seemed to be waiting for something. She looked directly at us and said, "Time is circular in water. We are not trapped. We are preserved." The forensic linguist I consulted, Dr. Nadia Patel, identified something extraordinary in the voice recordings captured near the Titanic site. The voices weren't speaking contemporaneous English, but a unique linguistic hybrid she termed temporal pidgin, a mixture of speech patterns spanning the 20th century, as if the speakers had been absorbing language changes while suspended in their liminal state. Most fascinating is the pronoun usage, Dr. Patel explained. The voices consistently use we, us when referring to themselves individually, never I or me. It's as if they've developed a collective identity during their century of suspension. This collective consciousness theory gained unexpected support from maritime records I discovered in Belfast archives. The shipbuilders who constructed Titanic reported strange phenomena during its creation. Tools moving overnight, blueprints showing modifications no one authorized, and most tellingly, multiple workers describing the same dream of a woman who walks through walls, watching us build her vessel of preservation. The photograph has begun affecting water systems throughout the building where it's contained. Pipes near the containment chamber vibrate in patterns that, when analyzed through spectrograms, reveal sound waves matching human speech too low for human hearing. When artificially raised to audible frequencies, they form a continuous loop of a woman's voice reciting names, hundreds of them matching Titanic's passenger manifest. Elizabeth's voice serves as a metronome between each name, whispering, "Remembered," after each one. What haunts me most is what happened during last week's attempt to date the photographic paper using non-invasive carbon-14 analysis. The results came back with 5 different dates simultaneously: 1913, 1954, 1987, 2005, and remarkably, 2029. When I questioned the lab about this obvious error, Their chief technician was visibly shaken. "This isn't equipment failure," she insisted. "The paper exists in multiple temporal states simultaneously. It's as if the photograph was taken, is being taken, and will be taken across different moments in time." I've interviewed a quantum computing specialist who proposes that Elizabeth and the other passengers might represent the first documented case of macroscopic quantum entanglement involving human consciousness. Traditional physics insists human minds can't maintain quantum coherence, Dr. Saito explained. But recent research suggests consciousness itself might be a quantum phenomenon. If 1,500 minds experienced simultaneous trauma in an environment with specific properties, near-freezing salt water, electromagnetic anomalies from the ship's failing systems, and Andrew's mysterious modifications, they might have achieved a state we've only theorized. Collective quantum consciousness preservation. This theory explains why Elizabeth appears as their representative. Her pre-existing temporal displacement condition made her the only one who could move between their suspended state and our linear timeline. She isn't haunting the photograph, she's using it as a window, the same way the watch serves as a mechanism and the wreck site as an anchor point. Most disturbing is the pattern I've identified in global oceanographic data. Every 73 days, precisely matching the time Titanic took to sink, tidal patterns worldwide briefly synchronize with movements recorded during April 14th and 15th, 1912. It's as if the entire planet's waters momentarily remember that night, creating a ripple effect through the collective hydrogeological system that connects all Earth's oceans. The passengers aren't just preserved in the North Atlantic, they've become part of water's molecular memory worldwide. Last night something changed. After months of research, hundreds of witness interviews, and countless tests on the photograph and watch, the artifacts synchronized for the first time. I had placed them side by side on my desk while reviewing oceanographic data when the watch's second hand suddenly aligned perfectly with the rhythm of the water droplets forming on the photograph's surface. The droplets began arranging themselves into text across the image. The preservation is failing. The water remembers, but memory fades. We need renewal. I've consulted with hydrologists who confirm something unprecedented is happening at the Titanic site. The microbial composition of the surrounding water has transformed, creating what they describe as a biomagnetic field that affects electronic equipment in increasingly wider radiuses. Satellite imagery shows a perfect circle of altered wave patterns extending outward from the wreckage, now visible even without specialized equipment. Dr. Yamamoto's latest theory suggests we've misunderstood the nature of Elizabeth's presence entirely. "She's not trapped," she explained during our video conference, her expression grave. "She's maintaining the preservation deliberately. What we're witnessing are signs that her ability to sustain this temporal suspension is weakening after more than a century of effort. The implications are staggering. If Elizabeth has been consciously maintaining this quantum state, this preservation of 1,500 souls in their moment of dying, what happens when she can no longer sustain it?" I received a call from Captain Merritt of the research vessel currently positioned above the Titanic site. His voice trembled as he described what their submersibles had recorded. The water inside the wreckage moving against natural currents to form human shapes throughout the ship's remains. More disturbing, these shapes appear to be slowly migrating toward the surface. "They're organized," he whispered, "moving in formation like passengers calmly proceeding to the upper decks. But their movements, they're wrong somehow. Too fluid, too synchronized, and they're accelerating." 3 separate psychics brought to my laboratory, without knowledge of each other or my research, drew identical images after touching the photograph. A woman standing on water, arms outstretched, with hundreds of hands reaching up toward her from below. Each psychic reported the same message. The anchoring fails. The preserved will wake. Most alarming is what happened during last night's thunderstorm. Lightning struck the university building housing our research exactly at 2:20 a.m. Security footage shows all water sources, faucets, fire sprinklers, even sealed bottles, activating simultaneously throughout the facility. The water flowed against gravity, forming a perfect sphere around the containment chamber holding our artifacts. When maintenance workers entered the flooded room hours later, they discovered something impossible. The water had arranged itself into a detailed three-dimensional replica of the Titanic, suspended in midair, maintaining its shape despite all physical laws. Inside this water sculpture, clearly visible, were tiny human figures positioned exactly as passengers would have been during those final moments. At the ship's bow stood Elizabeth Harmon, her figure larger than the others, facing east, toward the Atlantic. I believe we're witnessing the final stages of whatever has held these souls suspended between moments for over a century. Elizabeth's quantum preservation is collapsing, and the consequences of 1,500 consciousnesses suddenly experiencing their long-delayed deaths may reach far beyond the North Atlantic. Whatever is coming, it arrives soon. The watch has begun counting forward. The university lab has been evacuated following the water sculpture incident, but I remain behind, documenting the artifacts from behind reinforced glass. At midnight, both the photograph and watch began emitting a soft blue luminescence that intensified with each passing minute. When the clock struck 2:20, I witnessed what I can only describe as the membrane between moments temporarily dissolving. The photograph transformed before my eyes, its surface rippling like disturbed water. The figures of the survivors began moving as if in slow motion, turning one by one to face Elizabeth Harmon, who now stood prominently in their center. Their expressions transformed from solemn remembrance to dawning recognition, then to something resembling both fear and reverence. The watch's hands spun wildly, alternating between clockwise and counterclockwise rotations before settling into a steady rhythm matching human heartbeats. With each tick, droplets rose from the photograph, coalescing into a miniature three-dimensional recreation of the Titanic's grand staircase hovering inches above the image's surface. Then I heard her voice, not through any recording device but directly in my mind. "The preservation was never meant to be permanent," Elizabeth said, "only to give them time to understand, to accept. Time moves differently in water. A century for you has been but moments of realization for them." Through the glass, I watched as the containment chamber filled with seawater from no apparent source. The liquid rose not randomly but in perfect stratification, creating visible layers that refracted light differently. Each layer I somehow understood, representing different moments from that April night. They boarded a vessel meant to defy natural laws. Her voice continued, not just of buoyancy and engineering, but of time itself. Andrews and Tesla believed consciousness could be preserved within specialized architectural spaces. They were right, but preservation is not the same as salvation. The temperature in the observation room plummeted. My breath formed crystals in the air that arranged themselves into miniature human silhouettes before dissolving. I was chosen because I already existed partially outside time's conventional flow. My purpose wasn't victimhood but shepherding, guiding 1,500 souls through the prolonged moment of transition. The artifacts began to deteriorate before my eyes, not decaying but transforming. The photograph separated into individual water molecules that remained suspended in perfect formation, maintaining the image without physical substrate. The watch dissolved into its component elements, reforming as a perfect miniature replica of the Titanic's crow's nest. The anchoring is complete. They have finished their suspended moment of dying. The preservation ends tonight. Alarms blared throughout the facility as instruments registered massive energy fluctuations. On monitors showing the North Atlantic, satellite imagery captured an enormous circular disturbance directly above the wreck site, water spiraling upward in defiance of physical law to form a column nearly 300 feet high. "Not a haunting," Elizabeth's voice whispered, fading. "A transition. Not a disaster, but a translation. Water remembers, but memory without purpose becomes dilution. They have reached understanding. We release the preservation." As her voice disappeared completely, the water inside the containment chamber began to glow from within, illuminated by what appeared to be thousands of tiny lights rising toward the surface. Each one, I somehow knew, a consciousness finally completing its interrupted journey. This morning, coastal monitoring stations worldwide recorded what oceanographers are calling an unprecedented hydrological event. At precisely 2:20 a.m. GMT, every major body of water on Earth, from the Pacific Ocean to landlocked lakes, experienced a momentary stillness lasting exactly 73 minutes, the exact duration of Titanic's sinking. Tidal forces simply ceased, defying gravitational physics, before resuming their normal patterns. I've received reports from 17 different research vessels that witnessed strange phenomena during this period. Ship captains describe seeing perfectly circular areas of water becoming glass smooth and reflective as mirrors, each reflection showing not the sky above but scenes from what appeared to be Titanic's final moments. Most reported seeing passengers moving calmly through flooded corridors, their expressions peaceful rather than panicked. The North Atlantic event was visible from space, captured by weather satellites as an enormous spiral of luminescence centered exactly above the wreckage site. Spectral analysis of this light revealed a composition matching no known natural phenomenon, a combination of bioluminescent properties and what one physicist described as temporally displaced radiation. More telling are the physical changes at the wreck site itself. Submersibles dispatched after the event discovered something impossible. Sections of the Titanic appear significantly less deteriorated than in images taken just days earlier. Material analysis shows a reversal of corrosion patterns, as if time itself had partially unwound for the physical structure. The artifacts in our laboratory have transformed permanently. The photograph now shows only 19 people. Elizabeth Harmon's figure has vanished completely from the image, leaving behind what appears to be a perfect circle of undisturbed water where she once stood. The pocket watch has resumed normal function, keeping perfect time, though its inner workings now include microscopic engravings of 1,503 names arranged in a spiral pattern. Most significant is what was discovered this morning in Southampton archives. A previously overlooked manifest addendum lists one final passenger boarding Titanic just before departure. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews' personal guest, recorded only as E.H., temporal observer. Adjacent documentation, hidden in misfiled insurance records, reveals Andrews had created a specialized cabin incorporating Tesla-inspired electromagnetic coils within its walls. The cabin's location corresponds exactly to where salvage operations have always reported the strongest temperature anomalies. I've been contacted by 15 different individuals who experienced identical dreams last night. Each described standing on an endless ocean under starlight, watching as Titanic's passengers emerged from the depths not in terror, but in procession, led by a woman in Edwardian dress. As each person reached the surface, they transformed into light and rose toward the stars. These dreamers, I've discovered, are all descendants of passengers who perished that night. The water samples from our laboratory have been analyzed at the molecular level, revealing something that challenges our understanding of physics. Their hydrogen bonds have been restructured in patterns that quantum physicists describe as temporally symmetric, existing simultaneously in past, present, and future states. One researcher suggested that, for these particular water molecules, time flows in all directions at once. I received a message yesterday from Alexander Daniels, great-grandson of Officer Harold Lowe, the fifth officer who commanded Lifeboat 14 during the disaster. Alexander has maintained his great-grandfather's sea chest containing personal effects from his maritime career, including a sealed letter with instructions that it remain unopened until the sea releases its suspended souls. The Daniels family had dismissed this as the poetic language of a traumatized survivor, until Alexander saw news reports about the global oceanic stillness event. He broke the wax seal to find a letter describing what actually happened in Lifeboat 14 that night. "We returned for survivors as dawn approached," Lowe wrote. "Among those we pulled from the water was a woman wearing a pearl necklace and brooch, her skin ice cold, yet somehow not showing signs of hypothermia. She remained perfectly dry despite having been immersed in freezing water. When I asked her name, she replied, 'Elizabeth Harmon, though that matters less than what I've become.' As we rode toward Carpathia, she spoke quietly about Andrews's experiment in temporal preservation, and how the disaster had created the very conditions needed for its success. She described how she had volunteered because of her unique condition, existing slightly out of phase with normal time, making her the ideal conductor for what she called the suspended moment. Before boarding Carpathia, she turned to me and said, 'I will appear to leave with you, but I remain also with them. I exist now in the interstice between moments, please remember, they are not suffering in their suspension. They are completing the moment of transition that began this night, a process that requires decades in your time, but merely heartbeats in theirs. Lowe's letter included a sketch of a mechanical device Elizabeth had drawn for him, remarkably similar to the modifications found in Andrew's hidden designs. At the bottom, barely legible, he had written, "She made me promise to retrieve something from her cabin aboard Carpathia before we reached New York. A small journal bound in red leather. I honored her request but could never bring myself to read its contents. The Daniels family has located this journal among Harold Lowe's possessions. Within its pages, written in an increasingly ethereal hand, Elizabeth documented the experience of existing simultaneously in two states, both as a passenger moving normally through time aboard rescue ships and memorial voyages, and as the shepherd guiding 1,500 souls through their suspended transition in the perpetually sinking vessel." The final entry, dated April 15, 1913, exactly 1 year after the disaster and the same day as the memorial photograph, contains just 3 sentences. "The architecture of preservation holds, but requires constant maintenance across the moments. I have learned to exist between heartbeats, in the spaces where time pools rather than flows. When the last soul completes their transition, I too will finally rest." Most revealing was a technical diagram on the journal's final page, identical to symbols now appearing in water droplet patterns worldwide, showing what Elizabeth called the architecture of temporal preservation. The diagram depicts human consciousness as existing not linearly but in overlapping fields that can, under specific conditions, be maintained in stable suspension between moments of existence. Researchers from the quantum physics department have identified a pattern within the temporal anomalies surrounding our artifacts. Every major oceanic disaster since 1912 has coincided with subtle changes in Elizabeth's position within the photograph. Dr. Vasquez believes Elizabeth wasn't merely preserving Titanic's passengers, but actively intervening at subsequent maritime disasters, using the quantum architecture Andrews created to extend her reach across time and water. "She's been operating as a temporal rescue system," Dr. Vasquez explained. "The coordinates hidden in the watch's mechanism mark locations where she's extended the preservation field to other drowning victims. Elizabeth hasn't been haunting these sites. She's been saving people from experiencing death as we understand it." This theory gained startling validation when I interviewed a 96-year-old USS Indianapolis survivor who described being visited by a woman in old-fashioned clothes while floating in shark-infested waters. "She touched my forehead and suddenly time stretched," he recalled. 4 days in the water felt like mere minutes. She told me I was being preserved until rescue arrived. The lifeboat fragment has begun exhibiting new properties when placed near natural bodies of water. During controlled testing at Lake Michigan, researchers observed the surrounding water forming perfect miniature replicas of various shipwrecks from different historical periods, each populated by microscopic human figures moving with purpose rather than panic. Stanley Lord's journals reveal another layer to this mystery. The Californian's captain described recurring dreams where Elizabeth showed him the architecture of moments and how souls could be suspended between heartbeats. His final entry before death reads, "She has explained that water is time's perfect conductor. The ocean doesn't simply claim lives, it can preserve the moment of transition, extending it until comprehension arrives. Andrews didn't create a death trap, he built a sanctuary for consciousness. I've identified 27 individuals worldwide, all descendants of maritime disaster victims, who possess identical birthmarks resembling small, perfect circles. Medical scans reveal these marks contain trace elements matching the unique molecular composition found in water samples from the Titanic site. When these individuals touch natural water, witnesses report seeing momentary reflections of people in period clothing looking back from the surface. The university has established a permanent research initiative called Project Suspension to study this phenomenon. Preliminary findings suggest Elizabeth Harmon didn't merely preserve those 1,500 souls. She fundamentally altered our understanding of death itself. The preservation field she maintained for over a century has permanently affected water's molecular memory worldwide, creating what quantum physicists now term consciousness conductive resonance in Earth's hydrosphere. Most profound is what happened when Alexander Daniels brought Harold Lowe's sea chest to our laboratory. When placed near our artifacts, the chest began weeping salt water that, when analyzed, contained DNA fragments matching 27 different Titanic victims. More astonishing, these fragments showed no degradation despite being over a century old, as if preserved in a moment where biological breakdown simply doesn't occur. The photograph has changed one final time. Elizabeth now appears at its edge, 1 foot in the frame and 1 beyond it, looking not at the camera but at something just beyond our perception. The boundary between moments where 1,500 souls completed their long-delayed transition into whatever awaits beyond life's final threshold. The final mystery of Elizabeth Harmon and the Titanic's suspended souls has resolved itself in ways science may never fully comprehend. 3 days ago, at precisely 2:20 in the morning, lighthouses worldwide reported their beams temporarily bending toward the ocean rather than outward to the horizon. Coast Guard stations received thousands of calls describing corridors of light stretching across the water's surface. Most telling were the reports from offshore vessels witnessing what they described as processions of luminous figures, walking these pathways of light toward the horizon. I've collected testimonies from 53 witnesses who independently described seeing a woman in Edwardian dress leading these processions. Not one of these witnesses had prior knowledge of our research or Elizabeth Harmon's story. The artifacts have undergone their final transformation. This morning, I found the photograph had become blank except for a single handwritten message in period-appropriate ink. Preservation complete. Transition achieved. The architecture remains for those yet to come. The pocket watch continues functioning but now runs precisely 23 seconds slow, matching the exact time discrepancy recorded in Titanic's final distress signals. Most revealing was the message received by oceanographic research vessels positioned above the wreckage site. Their sonar equipment captured what audio specialists confirm is a woman's voice stating clearly, "The suspended moment has concluded." They have completed their transition. The preservation field remains accessible for future moments of water and fear. Elizabeth Harmon wasn't merely preserving those souls in a state of eternal drowning. She was extending the moment of transition from life to whatever lies beyond, creating a space where panic could transform into acceptance. The 1,500 souls of Titanic weren't trapped in suffering but suspended in a realm where mortal time operates differently, where seconds can expand into a century of comprehension and processing. Dr. Vasquez's team has proposed a radical revision to our understanding of death by drowning. Their research suggests water's molecular structure creates natural conditions for consciousness preservation that Elizabeth and Andrews merely amplified through their experiments. What we perceived as haunting was actually a compassionate intervention, Elizabeth extending the moment of transition to allow those souls time to understand and accept their passing. I believe Elizabeth Harmon's true nature may never be fully understood. Was she merely a woman with an unusual temporal condition who became the focal point for this preservation? Or was she something more? Perhaps what ancient mariners would have called a psychopomp, a guide for transitioning souls. The evidence suggests both may be true simultaneously. What remains certain is that the architecture she maintained has permanently altered the relationship between water, time, and human consciousness. The preservation field she established continues to function, not as a trap for souls, but as a sanctuary for those yet to face similar fates in water. As for Elizabeth herself, the final entry in Lowe's recovered journal suggests her purpose completed. I have maintained the suspension for 108 years in your time. When the last soul completes their transition, I too shall rest. Remember us not as the drowned, but as the preserved. The completion of my research has led me to a revelation about Elizabeth Harmon that transforms our understanding of the Titanic disaster entirely. While organizing my notes in the university basement archive, I discovered a small metal container that had fallen behind a cabinet, apparently undisturbed for decades. Inside was a glass negative predating the oceanic memorial photograph by 3 months. The image showed Elizabeth Harmon alone on what appears to be a private laboratory setting, connected to Tesla-designed equipment. The accompanying notes, written in Andrew's hand, documented Subject EH. His successful temporal displacement of 17 minutes 37 seconds. This wasn't merely experimentation, it was preparation. What haunts me now is understanding Elizabeth's true role. She wasn't randomly chosen for her temporal condition. She helped design the preservation field. Notes in her own handwriting detail modifications to Andrew's original blueprints, focusing specifically on the grand staircase area where wooden panels concealed Tesla coils tuned to specific electromagnetic frequencies. The horrifying truth emerges from Elizabeth's personal history, which I've finally uncovered. Before boarding Titanic, she had lost her entire family, husband and 3 children, in a ferry disaster off Massachusetts. According to hospital records, Elizabeth was clinically dead for 6 minutes after being pulled from those waters before inexplicably reviving with no lasting physical damage. She hadn't developed temporal displacement afterward. The drowning experience had revealed her existing condition. Water had always been her conduit between moments. Her collaboration with Andrews wasn't about creating an experimental preservation field. It was about intentionally establishing a sanctuary for drowning souls, born from her own experience of the terror of water death. The Titanic wasn't merely the site of a tragic accident. It was deliberately designed as the largest preservation architecture ever constructed, with Elizabeth as its cornerstone consciousness. Most disturbing is what oceanographers discovered yesterday at the wreck site. The quantum field surrounding the ship has begun expanding at a measurable rate. Water samples from locations thousands of miles away now show the same molecular restructuring previously confined to the North Atlantic. Elizabeth didn't merely preserve 1,500 souls and release them after a century. She transformed the fundamental properties of Earth's oceans. Every drowning victim since 1912 has unconsciously entered this preservation architecture, experiencing not terror and pain, but the extended transition she designed. The final page of Elizabeth's journal, which arrived mysteriously on my desk this morning, reveals her ultimate purpose. The waters will rise in coming centuries. Millions will face what we faced that night. I have remade death by water into something gentler, a suspended moment where fear dissolves into acceptance, where drowning becomes transition rather than termination. The 1,500 were never victims. They were the foundation souls of the architecture that will eventually shelter all humanity as the oceans reclaim the world. The impossible passenger was never trapped in a haunting. She was, and remains, the architect of humanity's eventual transition, preparing us for the long drowning to come. The implications of Elizabeth Harmon's temporal architecture have begun manifesting beyond academic research. Water-based natural disasters worldwide now exhibit inexplicable anomalies. Survivors of recent floods in Bangladesh reported experiencing stretched moments where minutes of submersion felt like mere seconds, granting them sufficient time to reach safety despite impossible odds. Initial drowning statistics from these events show a 37% reduction in fatalities compared to historical averages for disasters of similar magnitude. Maritime rescue organizations have documented unusual patterns during recent operations. Coast Guard units report locating victims in hypothermic waters who demonstrate no panic response and maintain perfect clarity despite conditions that should render consciousness impossible. These survivors universally describe encountering a woman in old-fashioned clothing who assured them time would operate differently until help arrived. Most compelling is the evidence emerging from hospitals worldwide. Medical researchers have identified a measurable change in brain activity patterns among near-drowning victims. EEG readings show unprecedented coherence in temporal lobe regions associated with perception of time, patterns matching exactly those found in Elizabeth's preserved brain scans from Tesla's laboratory. The photograph, though visually blank, continues affecting electronic devices placed nearby. Digital storage systems spontaneously fill with fragments of personal histories from Titanic passengers, not their final moments, but peaceful recollections from their lives before boarding. These fragments appear randomly on screens throughout our research facility, as if the preservation field is releasing memories no longer needed for its architecture. I've identified a network of individuals born since 1912 who share a remarkable characteristic. All survived drowning incidents after being submerged for medically impossible durations. They've independently formed an organization called Elizabeth's Witnesses, dedicated to documenting the experience of suspended transition during water submersion. Their collective testimony describes not the terror of drowning, but an encounter with what they call the architecture of gentle passage. Most unsettling is the pattern emerging in climate science projections. Rising sea levels follow precisely the expansion pattern of Elizabeth's preservation field, as if the water itself is preparing to implement her design on a global scale. Coastal communities report increasing instances of children born with small birthmarks matching the circular pattern found on Elizabeth's temple in Tesla's photographs, each located precisely where she placed her fingers on drowning victims' foreheads. The university's quantum research department has proposed a revolutionary hypothesis. What if Elizabeth Harmon's intervention wasn't merely compassionate, but evolutionarily necessary? As climate change accelerates and oceans reclaim coastal regions, humanity faces a future where death by water becomes increasingly common. Perhaps Elizabeth's architecture represents not just spiritual comfort, but biological adaptation, preparing human consciousness for a world where our relationship with water must fundamentally change. I find myself standing at shorelines, watching waves with new understanding. What once seemed the random movement of water now appears purposeful, methodical, like the gentle breathing of a vast, patient entity preparing to cradle humanity through its most profound transition. The impossible passenger has transformed our understanding not just of death but of water itself, not as destroyer, but as preserver of our final moments in a world where time itself becomes as fluid as the rising tides. The culmination of my research has brought me to the shores of Southampton, where Titanic began its fateful journey over a century ago. I stand at the water's edge, watching the evening tide with newfound awareness of what Elizabeth Harmon has created. The blank photograph and stopped watch rest in a small wooden box beside me, artifacts that have transformed our understanding of death, time, and water itself. Yesterday, I received communication from 17 coastal monitoring stations reporting identical phenomena: water temporarily flowing in perfect spirals at precisely 2:20 in the morning, creating miniature whirlpools that resolve into Elizabeth's distinctive facial profile when photographed from above. These formations last exactly 73 minutes before dissolving back into normal tidal patterns. The quantum research team has confirmed what we long suspected. The preservation field continues expanding at an accelerating rate. Its molecular signature now appears in rainwater collected from every continent, suggesting Elizabeth's architecture has entered Earth's entire hydrological cycle. Children born during rainstorms increasingly demonstrate the temporal sensitivity once unique to Elizabeth, perceiving moments slightly out of sequence, answering questions seconds before they're asked. Most remarkable are the dreams now reported by people who have never encountered our research. Thousands describe identical visions of standing on a ship's deck as water rises around them, feeling not terror but profound peace as a woman in Edwardian dress touches their forehead and whispers, "Time stretches in water, fear nothing." I've made arrangements for the artifacts to be permanently sealed within a specialized containment vessel and placed at the exact coordinates where Titanic began its descent. Tomorrow, a research vessel will position them on the ocean floor, returning Elizabeth's quantum anchors to their point of origin, completing the circle she designed over a century ago. My own role in this story concludes with this final documentation. The preservation field no longer needs human observation or understanding to fulfill its purpose. Elizabeth created something that transcends individual consciousness, a fundamental restructuring of how humanity experiences its most primal fear. As I prepare to release these artifacts back to the waters that birthed them, I find myself wondering about Elizabeth's true nature. Was she merely human, gifted with temporal displacement that allowed her to create this architecture of mercy? Or was she something more, perhaps water itself taking human form to teach us how to face the coming age of rising seas? The answer perhaps lies in the final message that appeared this morning on my computer screen, though it was disconnected from any network. Remember us not as victims of water, but as its partners in transition. The ocean doesn't claim lives, it transforms them. I remain within every molecule that falls as rain, rises as mist, or carries a drowning soul gently through their final moments. The photograph was never the evidence. It was merely the window through which you learn to see. The tide reaches my feet now, water gently touching the box containing the artifacts. I feel a profound sense of completion as I prepare to return them to their source. Knowing Elizabeth Harmon's impossible presence has forever changed our relationship with water and death itself. The tide pulls back from my feet, drawing the small wooden box containing the artifacts an inch toward the sea before depositing it again on the wet sand. 3 times it reaches, 3 times retreats, as if the ocean itself is hesitant to reclaim what once belonged to it. I understand this reluctance. These objects have become more than mere artifacts. They are the keys to a doorway between worlds. As darkness falls over Southampton Harbor, the water before me begins to glow with a soft blue luminescence that matches precisely the color that emanated from the photograph during its transformations. Small waves form perfect concentric circles around my position, defying the natural wind pattern. I am being acknowledged. Last week, during the final analysis of the water samples, our team discovered something previously overlooked. The molecular restructuring wasn't simply changing water's properties, it was encoding information. When processed through quantum computing algorithms, these patterns revealed themselves as human memories. Thousands of them, preserved within the hydrogen bonds of ordinary seawater. Not just memories from Titanic passengers, but from every person who has drowned since 1912. The preservation field hasn't merely been suspending the moment of death. It's been collecting the totality of human experience with water. Every child's first swim, every sailor's journey, every baptism and tear, all becoming part of what Elizabeth called the liquid consciousness. I received a letter yesterday from Helena Mercer, great-granddaughter of Officer Lowe, containing a final page from Elizabeth's journal that had been separated from the rest. The text, written in increasingly ethereal handwriting, reads, "When humanity faces its final drowning, as the waters inevitably rise, they will not enter darkness as strangers. The sea will welcome them as old friends, their memories already part of its consciousness." This is not humanity's end, but its transformation. From creatures who emerged from the ocean eons ago to beings who will return to it, bringing their collected consciousness back to the source. The university called this morning with news from the Quantum Lab. The specialized containment vessel we designed for tomorrow's submersion has been spontaneously filling with seawater despite being completely sealed. More remarkably, this water contains trace DNA from every person who has drowned in the past century, a complete genetic archive preserved in suspension. I understand now why I was drawn into this mystery, why the photograph found its way to me. Elizabeth needed a final chronicler, someone to document the transition between what humanity has been and what it will become. Not merely a researcher of the impossible, but a witness to the necessary. The tide returns, stronger now, finally pulling the box from the sand into the gentle surf. I make no move to retrieve it. The artifacts have served their purpose in our world. They belong now to the architecture they helped create. As the box disappears beneath the waves, I see a momentary silhouette standing on the water's surface. A woman in Edwardian dress, her hand raised not in farewell but in recognition. Tomorrow, I will officially conclude this research. But tonight, I remain at the shore, watching as the sea prepares to receive back what it once surrendered. Not just 2 artifacts, but the understanding they brought to the surface. The world's relationship with water has changed in ways both subtle and profound. Children now instinctively hold their breath longer than human physiology should allow. Drowning statistics have plummeted worldwide despite rising sea levels and increasingly violent storms. Something fundamental has shifted in our collective unconscious, a gift from Elizabeth Harmon that continues unfolding across generations. The original photograph has been replicated in museums globally, though none show Elizabeth's figure. They exist as empty frames where visitors report feeling a gentle presence moving among them, particularly those who have survived near-drowning experiences. Water droplets occasionally form on these frames regardless of humidity conditions, always in patterns resembling coordinates of maritime disasters yet to occur. I've retired from active research but continue documenting testimonies from Elizabeth's witnesses. Their accounts grow more detailed as her preservation field strengthens, no longer just reporting stretched moments during submersion, but describing elaborate architectural spaces they enter while drowning, complete with staircases rising through impossible waters and doorways opening onto memories not their own. Last month, during the centennial commemoration of another historic shipwreck, attendees reported seeing the silhouette of a woman in Edwardian dress walking across the harbor surface. Marine biologists later discovered a perfect circle of altered water molecules at that exact location. Water that, when analyzed, contained the complete genetic sequences of every victim from that disaster. The ultimate purpose of Elizabeth's architecture reveals itself more clearly as climate models project our watery future. As coastal cities prepare for inevitable submersion, engineers have begun incorporating design elements that mysteriously match fragments from Andrew's and Tesla's original blueprints, though none claim to have seen these historical documents. It's as if humanity collectively remembers something it hasn't yet experienced. I keep a small vial of water from the Titanic site on my desk. Sometimes in the early morning hours, I watch it glow with soft blue luminescence. Occasionally, I glimpse a face reflected in its surface, not Elizabeth's, but my own, somehow both younger and older simultaneously, as if viewed from outside conventional time. Yesterday, a package arrived containing a newly discovered photograph, this one showing Titanic's passengers boarding in Southampton. Among the crowd stands Elizabeth Harmon, looking directly at the camera with knowing eyes, though historical records confirm she hadn't yet arrived when this image was taken. More telling is what modern scanning technology revealed hidden in the photograph's chemical emulsion. Microscopic writing visible only under specialized equipment that reads simply, "The preservation continues. The architecture expands. Remember us when the waters rise." Elizabeth Harmon wasn't just a passenger on a doomed ship. She was the architect of humanity's future relationship with water, not as adversary but as partner in our inevitable transition. The impossible passenger has become our impossible guide, preparing us for the long submersion ahead. The tide continues rising, Elizabeth continues watching, and we continue learning to breathe in her architecture of suspended moments. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.